This new GNU is a great opportunity for South African governance to embrace compromise, or to further get compromised. This is clearly evident in some of the choices made in the compiling of this cabinet. Dropping Dr. Naledi Pandor as Minister of International Relations and Cooperation, after the at times stellar job she has done fielding both praise and criticism aimed at South Africa for our recent international proclivities, quite questionable if you ask me. I suppose if you criticize Russia once, then you are out the door at the earliest excuse. You know, not being able to tolerate even the slightest bit of dissent is not a good leadership quality, ANC, because that's how you end up surrounded by spineless sycophants that provide no ability to self-regulate the quality of your own leadership. Pay attention to that, dear viewer. We will be revisiting it later in the video. There is a narrative that formed immediately after the elections, attempting to explain the poor performance of the EFF. The way it goes is that the EFF is a pan-Africanist movement and wants to open borders, and so because South Africans are xenophobic, they decided to punish the EFF for such utterances at the ballot. I think that this is wrong. But I won't merely say that it is wrong. Years of Afrikaans first additional language have taught me to motiveer my antwoord. So I will argue my case. If this was true, then we should also expect a commensurate rise of support for the parties that outrightly campaigned on the immigration issue. Those parties being Action SA and the Patriotic Alliance. Action SA was not one of the big winners in this election. So that theory immediately dies as far as they're concerned.
The only party that's really happy in this arrangement this time is MK.
But the Patriotic Alliance was one of the big winners.
And to some extent, the Patriotic Alliance.
So does this theory at least explain their results? Well, no. And for your answer, you just need to look at who voted for Mr. Mckenzie. If you do, you will find that most of the votes came from coloured communities. Gayton Mckenzie has acknowledged this himself and even called coloured people his base.
Our votes are predominantly from the coloured community, but not exclusively. There are black people that voted for the PA, but every party has a base.
Therefore, the conclusion is inescapable that most of the Patriotic Alliance's votes come from the frustrations of some members of a community that considers itself underserved by the status quo of established political parties in South Africa. So they went for something new. Just to be clear, there is xenophobia in South Africa. Although evidence to suggest that it had a significant role to play in the outcomes of our recent elections is in very poor supply. I mean, think about it. How galvanizing can an issue be if its most ardent champion decided to abandon it at the first opportunity he got to be part of the government of national unity?
And if I don't get Home Affairs Ministry, I can't now come and say I'm out. Then I care more about positions than the country. It's not my prerogative. President Ramaphosa will decide where he puts me.
He received Minister of Sports, Arts and Culture, and he was happy about it. On a side note, one of the constants in South African politics is seeing Kenukunene seemingly get thrown under the bus every single time. He somehow always ends up sleeping with the fishes, the way any respectable sushi king would. This, to me personally, is a very important ministry. Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela understood the power of sports for nation building, the power for arts and culture to do the same. To the point that even to this day, when our sports stars reach historic heights with their achievements and unite us, however briefly, in collective appreciation of our story, they are still spoken about as legacy products of uMandela's Madiba magic. But now, when they fly our flag high enough to touch that rarefied air of sporting immortality, this man will be there to corrupt their greatest moments with the presence of his putrid form of patriotism. He will be wrapping himself in the colors that represent our diverse democracy, all while he himself aspires to dictatorship. What sort of patriot is that? What patriot hates the youth such that he wants forced conscription conscription for them so that the future of this country can go die off in some foreign lands? What sort of patriot praises Oranje, even after he himself admits that he got the sense he might not have been treated with the same level of friendliness on his visit there if he were a black person? That's not my patriot, is it yours? And after seeing it for himself, he concluded it is a whites-only place. How can this patriot of a diverse South Africa, who loves all these colors, praise a place that is antagonistic to the very foundational values of the country whose dignity he alleges he seeks so passionately to protect? How is he a patriot of this country when he hates our secular republic, which is what allows for freedom of religion for all South Africans? At least far more than was the case during the authoritarian, theocratic rule that used to criminalize, marginalize, and persecute other people's belief systems, condemning them all to evil itself. As I alluded to earlier, if leaders cannot even tolerate the slightest bit of perceived dissent, that is how they end up surrounded by sycophants and lose the ability to properly regulate the quality of their own leadership. That is exactly what happens in dictatorships, in autocratic organizations such as the Patriotic Alliance. And that's also what happens with the white Christian ethnostates to which he pays exorbitant compliments. This is not government compromising. This is government getting compromised. And that man is not a true patriot. He is a cross-crusader who sells the second-hand Calvinism of the Dutch Reformed Church.
We pick it up in KZN, where in Durban, the Bonella community is reeling with shock after 3 teenagers were killed execution-style amid a social media dispute. Among them was 18-year-old Gayton Vanderbilt, who, along with his friends, was shot in the head on June 7 outside his home at a block of flats by an unidentified assailant. The family of the victims expressed disbelief, believing a prior dispute with another group of boys had been settled peacefully.
All of this criticism aside, I truly hope that Minister Gayton Mckenzie succeeds, especially when he says he's going to fight gangs with sports. I don't hope it for his benefit, but for the benefit of the young people that are targeted by these gangs for recruitment, or to be the casualties of heartless violence. But either way, win or lose, I think he is absolutely right. Spinning is going to be the #1 sport of this country. Either spinning cars or spinning lies. Oh yeah, I was also supposed to talk about Meneer Pieter Groenewald. He is the new Minister of Correctional Services. They probably appointed him because he looks like a school principal. Maybe he and Gayton Mckenzie will get along in this new GNU. After all, he does like to collect colored people as fellow Afrikaans speakers so that he can continue on his crusade for minority rights.
We are fighting for the protection of minorities in South Africa. And the reason is quite clear, that we say that minorities must be protected against the tyranny of the majority. If you look in South Africa, the race-based legislation of affirmative action is against white people in South Africa and the brown people and communities in South Africa. And therefore, we welcomed Mr. Pieter Maree as the candidate for the Vryheidsfront Plus as a premier candidate in the Western Cape.
Maree says the union between the FF Plus and the BBB is history in the making. He summed it up as the second great trek to unity among Afrikaans people. But he insists the BBB will retain its own identity, focusing on protecting the rights of coloured people.
Plus, it may interest Gayton Mckenzie to know Pieter Groenewald helped fight for Oranje to be recognized. And I'm sure that a man with such a disposition will deal fairly well with having to preside over a mostly black prison population. But hey, let's not be overly critical. Let's start focusing on some of the positives. Perhaps Gayton Mckenzie could actually give him some pointers on how to defeat the high recidivism rates in South Africa's prisons.
Some people come to me and say the death penalty is inhumane.
Never mind.
We are fighting for the protection of minorities in South Africa.